No one believed her. When Professor Flena Narquez walked into the courtroom, the world had already decided she was guilty, not because of evidence, there was none, not because of character, her students adored her, but because she was different, too sharp, too unapologetically brilliant for a system that preferred obedience over true genius. The fluorescent lights of the Los Angeles County Courthouse cast harsh shadows across her face as she took her seat at the defendant's table, her slender fingers clutching a worn leather satchel filled with notebooks. Her attorney, a public defender named Paul Ramirez, looked at her with a mixture of pity and resignation. They both knew what they were up against, not just the prosecution, but a deeply ingrained prejudice against those who dared to challenge the status quo with their intelligence. Flena had spent her life fighting battles others couldn't see. Growing up in a small apartment in East Los Angeles, she was the first in her family to attend university, the first woman in her department to publish in international journals, the first to break records in mathematical research at Stanford University, and perhaps the first to make her colleagues deeply, bitterly uncomfortable. It wasn't just that Flena was smart, it was that she made others feel small, not by arrogance, but simply by existing. Her mind worked on a different plane, seeing patterns and solutions that others missed entirely. In the male-dominated world of advanced mathematics in 1960s America, her brilliance was not celebrated, but suspected. She was an anomaly, and anomalies were dangerous. As she sat in the courtroom, she could feel the weight of every dismissive glance, every whispered doubt that had followed her throughout her career. But beneath her calm exterior, a fire burned, the same fire that had carried her from poverty to prominence, the same determination that had helped her solve equations others deemed impossible. If only they knew what she was capable of. If only they knew what she had already endured. If you are enjoying the story, type 5 in the comments and subscribe for more videos like this. If not, type 0. It helps me create even better content. For you, continuing. When an expensive prototype computer and confidential research files vanished from her department at UCLA, where she now taught, it didn't take long for someone to suggest her name. "She's too ambitious," they whispered in faculty lounges and administrative offices. "She doesn't fit in here. She probably thinks the rules don't apply to her." The missing research was groundbreaking. Algorithms that could revolutionize weather prediction models, potentially saving thousands of lives from natural disasters. Work that Flena had contributed to significantly, though her name had been mysteriously absent from several key papers. Within days, she found herself suspended, her campus access revoked, her reputation in tatters. Within weeks, she faced criminal charges for theft and intellectual property violations. The irony was bitter, being accused of stealing what she had helped create. As the district attorney rose to make his opening statement, painting her as a conniving outsider with delusions of grandeur, Flena caught sight of her former department head, Dr. William Thompson, sitting behind the prosecution. His smug expression, "I told her everything she needed to know." This wasn't about missing research or a stolen computer. This was about power, about putting her in her place. This was about erasing her from a narrative in which brilliant women, especially those of Hispanic descent, were never meant to be protagonists. She straightened her spine, remembering her grandmother's words. "They can take your possessions, mi niña, but never your mind." And her mind was the most dangerous weapon in this courtroom. The prosecution's case seemed airtight on the surface. Flena had been seen working late the night the items disappeared. She had expressed frustration about not receiving proper credit for her work. Her financial situation was precarious, her modest professor's salary barely covering her living expenses and the medical bills for her ailing mother. Perfect motive, perfect opportunity. What they lacked in actual evidence, they made up for, in character assassination. One by one, colleagues took the stand, speaking of her difficult personality, her unhealthy ambition, her strange, almost obsessive work habits. None mentioned her exceptional intellect, her dedicated teaching, her groundbreaking publications. None spoke of how she spent weekends tutoring underprivileged students for free, or how she had developed a simplified mathematical model that had already improved hurricane evacuation protocols on the East Coast. Paul Ramirez did his best on cross-examination, but he was fighting an uphill battle against deeply entrenched biases. Ms. Narquez, he had told her during their first meeting, the truth might not be enough here. As she watched the parade of witnesses twist her life story into something unrecognizable, she wondered if he was right. Could her truth stand against their lies? Could her genius survive their determined mediocrity? The answer lay in the notebooks. She clutched like a lifeline, pages filled with equations, proofs, and innovations that had poured from her mind over years of dedicated work. Would anyone even understand what they contained? Would anyone care? What if the world wasn't ready for what she had to offer? What if they preferred the comfort of their prejudices to the challenge of her brilliance? The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale injustice as the trial entered its fourth day. Flena sat alone during the lunch recess, reviewing her notes while everyone else filed out. The isolation was familiar. She had always been separate, different, operating on a frequency few could tune into. A movement at the corner of her vision caught her attention. A young woman approached, Maria Diaz, one of her former students, now working as a junior researcher at Caltech. "Professor Narquez," she whispered, glancing nervously around. "I believe you, and I'm not the only one." Maria slipped a folded piece of paper across the table. "Dr. Thompson has been taking credit for others' work for years. I've been gathering evidence." Flena unfolded the paper to find a list of names, other researchers, mostly women and minorities, whose work had mysteriously become Thompson's intellectual property. "I'm scared to speak up," Maria admitted. "He has so much power in the field." Flena reached across the table and squeezed the young woman's hand. "Fear is what men like Thompson count on, Maria. But remember, fear and courage are sisters. They share the same room in our hearts." The bailiff called for the court to reconvene, and Maria slipped away, leaving Flena with something she had almost lost: hope. The prosecution was calling their star witness now, Dr. William Thompson himself. As he took the stand, immaculate, in his tailored suit with distinguished silver at his temples, Flena felt a curious calm settle over her. Thompson was intelligent, certainly, but his brilliance had limits. Hers did not, and perhaps that was what he had feared all along. Will the so-called genius professor be able to prove her innocence against such overwhelming testimony? Or will her career and freedom be destroyed by a system designed to keep brilliance in its designated place? Dr. William Thompson commanded, the courtroom with practiced ease, his voice resonating with the confidence of a man who had never had his authority questioned. "Professor Narquez showed an unhealthy interest in the research," he testified, his expression a perfect mask of professional concern. "She often stayed late, far beyond what was necessary for her assigned portions of the project." The district attorney nodded sympathetically. "And in your professional opinion, Dr. Thompson, could anyone else have reproduced this research if they had stolen it?" Thompson's smile was thin, condescending. "Impossible. The mathematical models were far too complex for anyone but the original team, my team, to fully comprehend, let alone reproduce independently." Flena felt her public defender stiffen beside her. This was the heart of the prosecution's case, that only by stealing could she have accessed such advanced work. The irony made her want to laugh despite the gravity of her situation. From the gallery, she felt Maria's eyes on her, along with a handful of her former students who had come to show support. Their presence strengthened her resolve. For them, she could not fail. For every student who had ever been underestimated, for every woman who had been dismissed, for every person of color whose contributions had been erased from history, she would fight. As Paul Ramirez rose for cross-examination, she slipped him a note with a question to ask. He read it, eyebrows rising slightly, before turning to Thompson. "Dr. Thompson, can you explain to the court the specific mathematical principle behind the atmospheric prediction model that was allegedly stolen?" Thompson blinked, momentarily thrown. "It's highly technical, but in essence, it uses differential equations to predict chaotic systems." "Could you be more specific?" pressed Ramirez. "Perhaps demonstrate the core equation." Thompson's confidence faltered. I hardly think this is the appropriate venue for such advanced mathematics. And there it was, the first crack in his facade. Flynn knew, as did Maria and her students, that Thompson didn't fully understand the mathematics he claimed to have developed. He was an administrator, a politician in academic clothing, who had built his career on the work of others. As he stepped down from the witness stand, his eyes met Flenner's for the first time since the trial began. In that moment, they both knew the truth. Only one of them was a genuine mathematician, and it wasn't him. That night in her small apartment, Flenner spread her notebooks across her kitchen table, translating years of work into a form the court might understand. The clock ticked past midnight, then 1, then 2. Her mother's home healthcare nurse had left hours ago, and she could hear the soft, labored breathing from the bedroom where Carmen Narquez fought her own battle against cancer. Everything Flenner had done, every late night, every extra project, every compromise, had been to keep her mother comfortable, to provide the care that their limited insurance wouldn't cover. If she went to prison, what would happen to her mother? The question haunted her as she worked through the night, distilling complex mathematical theories into clear, irrefutable evidence. By dawn, she had a plan, not just to defend herself, but to expose the system that had allowed men like Thompson to prosper, while women like her struggled for recognition. She allowed herself a few hours of sleep before returning to the courthouse, her mind sharp despite her exhaustion. Today, the defense would begin its case. Today, Flenner Narquez would speak her truth. As she took the stand, she felt a strange calm settle over her. The prosecutor approached, his expression smug, confident he faced an easy target. "Professor Narquez," he sneered, "how do you explain your unique access to the stolen research?" Flenner rose slowly. She wore no jewelry, no makeup, no armor beyond her battered dignity, and the fierce intelligence that shone from her eyes. "Because," she said, her voice low but unwavering, "I created it." A ripple moved through the courtroom. The prosecutor faltered, then recovered. "Are you claiming that Dr. Thompson and his team stole your work, not the other way around?" "I'm stating a fact," Flenner replied. "I am the original author of the research papers that were stolen. Every theorem, every algorithm, every model, they're mine." She reached into her satchel and pulled out her notebooks, worn, dog-eared, filled with complex mathematical proofs, dating back years. "May I present my evidence?" The judge, intrigued despite himself, nodded. "Have you ever witnessed someone being wrongfully accused? Have you or someone you know ever had to fight to prove your worth in a system that seemed designed against you? Share your experience in the comments below." With steady hands, Flenner opened her notebooks and began to explain. She started with the foundations, work she had done as a graduate student that had evolved into the current research. She pointed out dates, personal notations, even coffee stains that marked late nights of breakthrough thinking. Her voice grew stronger as she spoke, the language of mathematics flowing from her like poetry. "This notation here," she explained, pointing to a complex equation, "is a mathematical shorthand I developed in my undergraduate years. It's unique to me. You won't find it in any textbook or paper, except those I've authored." The prosecutor attempted to interrupt, to discredit her, but the evidence was mounting. Former students came forward testifying to seeing these notebooks years ago, to learning this unique notation in Flenner's classes. Colleagues from other institutions confirmed, receiving letters from her discussing these theories long before the official research began. But the most damning evidence came when Flenner requested a whiteboard and marker. "If I may," she said, addressing the judge, "I'd like to demonstrate something." The judge, clearly intrigued by this unusual turn, granted permission. What followed astonished everyone in the courtroom. With fluid movements, Flenner began to reconstruct the supposedly stolen research from memory, explaining each step with clarity and precision. No notes, no references, just the contents of her extraordinary mind flowing onto the whiteboard. The equations grew more complex, building upon each other in a mathematical symphony that even the experts in the room struggled to follow. For 45 minutes the courtroom watched spellbound, as she built a world of logic and brilliance right before their eyes. When she finally set down the marker, the silence was profound. Even the prosecutor seemed at a loss for words. "This," Flena said quietly, gesturing to the whiteboard filled with elegant equations, "is what they tried to take from me. Not just my work, but my voice, my contribution, my place in the conversation." She turned to face the jury directly. "Those who fear intelligence," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it, "will always seek to destroy it." The silence that followed was electric. The prosecutor stammered, attempting to regain control of his carefully constructed narrative. This performance doesn't prove anything," he managed finally. "Anyone could memorize equations." It was then that Dr. Richard Klein, a leading mathematician from MIT who had been called as an expert witness, stood up. "With all due respect," he said, his voice carrying through the courtroom, "what we just witnessed was not memorization. Professor Narquez didn't simply reproduce equations. She explained their derivation, their purpose, their evolution. She demonstrated not just knowledge of the work, but understanding so profound it could only come from being its creator." He turned to the judge. "In my professional opinion, it would be impossible to fake this level of understanding. What we have witnessed today is not theft, it is genius." The word hung in the air. Genius, so often reserved for men, so rarely applied to women like Flena. The prosecutor's case was unraveling. In a desperate attempt to salvage it, he called for a recess, hoping to regroup. As the courtroom emptied, Flena remained seated, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried her through her demonstration was fading, leaving her vulnerable to the doubt that had haunted her since childhood, the fear that no matter how brilliant she was, the world would never make space for her. Paul Ramirez sat beside her, genuine admiration in his eyes. "That was incredible," he said quietly, "but we're not done yet. Thompson won't go down without a fight." Flena nodded, gathering her strength. She had spent her life fighting for recognition, for the right to occupy space in a world that constantly tried to diminish her. One more battle, then. One more stand. Against those who would deny her rightful place. For her students, for her mother, for herself. Will the court recognize Flena's genius and vindicate her against these false accusations? Or will Thompson's influence prevail over truth and justice? When court reconvened after the recess, the energy had shifted dramatically. The prosecution's witnesses seemed less certain, their testimonies more hesitant. Dr. Thompson recalled. To the stand was visibly agitated as he attempted to discredit Flena's demonstration. "Professor Narquez was certainly involved in aspects of the research," he conceded, "but her claim to be the sole originator is absurd. These concepts were developed by a team, my team, over several years." Paul Ramirez approached the stand, a new confidence in his stride. "Dr. Thompson, can you explain the mathematical principle behind the third equation Professor Narquez demonstrated, the one dealing with chaotic atmospheric systems?" Thompson hesitated, sweat beading on his forehead. "It's a modified version of existing chaos theory principles." "Could you elaborate?" pressed Ramirez. "Perhaps demonstrate it, as Professor Narquez did?" Thompson's face flushed. "I'm an administrator, not a performing monkey. My expertise is in directing research, not understanding it," Ramirez suggested. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The judge called for order, but the damage was done. As Thompson struggled to regain his composure, Maria Diaz was called to the stand. Though visibly nervous, her testimony was clear and devastating. "Dr. Thompson has a pattern of taking credit for others' work," she explained, producing emails and documentation showing how Thompson had systematically removed Flena's name from papers, reassigned her discoveries to other researchers, and isolated her from collaborative opportunities. "He did the same to me," Maria continued, "and to at least 3 other researchers that I know of, all women, all minorities." The case was crumbling, and everyone knew it. By the end of the day, the judge had seen enough. "In light of the compelling evidence presented by the defense," he announced, "and the concerning pattern of behavior revealed about the prosecution's key witness, I am dismissing all charges against Professor Flena Narquez, effective immediately." The courtroom erupted in applause, quickly silenced by the judge's gavel. Flena sat motionless, tears streaming down her face, not of joy, but of vindication. Years of being diminished, overlooked and underestimated had culminated in this moment of truth. As she gathered her notebooks, she caught sight of Thompson slipping out a side door, his reputation in tatters. She felt no pleasure in his downfall, only relief that the truth had finally prevailed. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, cameras flashing as they called out questions. "Professor Narquez, how does it feel to be vindicated? Will you sue the university for wrongful termination? What's next for your research?" Flena stood on the steps, momentarily overwhelmed by the attention. Then she spotted her mother in her wheelchair, accompanied by her nurse. Carmen Narquez had insisted on being present for the verdict, despite her weakness. The sight of her mother's proud smile gave Flena the strength to address the crowd. "Today isn't just about my vindication," she began, her voice carrying across the courthouse plaza. "It's about every person who has ever been silenced, overlooked or pushed aside, because they didn't fit someone else's idea of what a scientist, a mathematician or a genius should look like." She paused, gathering her thoughts. The research that was at the center of this case has the potential to save thousands of lives by improving our ability to predict severe weather events. That's what matters. Not who gets credit, but how we use our knowledge to serve humanity. The reporters pressed closer, hungry for more of her story, but Flena had spent enough time in the spotlight. She made her way through the crowd to her mother, kneeling beside the wheelchair to embrace her. "Mija," Carmen whispered, stroking her daughter's hair, "I always knew your mind was a gift. Now the world knows too." As they prepared to leave, a representative from the National Science Foundation approached. "Professor Narquez," the woman said, "we've been following your case with great interest. We'd like to discuss funding for your research, independent funding under your sole direction." Flena looked at her mother, then back at the representative. "I'd be interested in hearing more," she said. As they walked away from the courthouse, Flena realized that this ending was also a beginning. The battle for recognition was won, but the work, the real work, was just beginning. And for the first time in months she felt eager to return to it. Is justice truly served when the innocent are vindicated, or does true justice require more, perhaps a transformation of the system itself? The weeks following the trial transformed Flena's life in ways she could never have anticipated. Universities that had once ignored her research now eagerly sought her expertise. Research institutions offered fellowships and grants. The academic journals that had previously rejected her papers now invited her to submit. The same world that had been ready to bury her was now desperate to claim her as their own. But Flena was selective about which opportunities she pursued. The National Science Foundation grant provided her with the freedom to establish her own research center, focused on applied mathematics for disaster prevention and climate modeling. She assembled a team of brilliant minds, many of them women, and minorities who had been overlooked by traditional academic institutions. Maria Diaz became her right hand, bringing her own innovative perspectives to their collaborative work. UCLA, embarrassed by their role in her persecution, offered her a full professorship with tenure, complete with a public apology. After careful consideration, Flena accepted, not out of forgiveness, but because she recognized the platform it would give her to change the system from within. Dr. Thompson had quietly resigned, his reputation tarnished beyond repair. Flena felt no satisfaction in his downfall, only a determination that what had happened to her would not happen to others. She established a mentorship program for underrepresented students in mathematics and sciences, naming it after her grandmother, who had first recognized and nurtured her exceptional mind. As her professional life flourished, her personal life found a new rhythm as well. With her reputation restored and financial security established, she was able to provide her mother with the best medical care available. Carmen's condition stabilized, giving them precious time together. In the evenings, when work was done, Flena would sit by her mother's bedside, sharing stories of the day's discoveries and challenges. "You were right to fight," Carmen told her one evening, her voice weak but her eyes bright with pride. not just for yourself, but for all those who will come after you. Flenna held her mother's hand, thinking of the students whose lives she was now touching, the young minds she was helping to shape. "I had a good teacher," she replied softly. The battle had nearly broken her, but in surviving it, she had found a strength and purpose greater than she had ever imagined. The path forward was clear now, not just to explore the frontiers of mathematical theory, but to transform the very culture of science itself. 1 year after the trial, Flenna stood at a podium in Stockholm, Sweden, the Nobel Prize medal gleaming against her simple black dress. Her groundbreaking work in mathematical modeling for climate prediction had saved countless lives during the previous hurricane season, earning her recognition on a global scale. As she surveyed the audience of distinguished scientists and dignitaries, she thought of how far she had come from that courthouse in Los Angeles. Mathematics, she began her acceptance speech, is often described as the universal language, yet for too long the conversation has been dominated by too few voices. Today I accept this honor not just for myself, but for every person whose brilliance has been dismissed, whose contributions have been minimized, whose potential has been underestimated. The applause was thunderous, but Flenna wasn't finished. The true power of mathematics, of any science, lies not in exclusivity but in accessibility, not in competition but in collaboration, not in prestige but in purpose. She spoke of her research center, now thriving with innovative thinkers from diverse backgrounds. She spoke of the students she had mentored, many of whom were now making their own contributions to the field. She spoke of her mother, who had lived just long enough to see her daughter receive the news of her Nobel nomination. When she finished, the standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes. Later that evening, at the reception, a young girl approached her, the daughter of one of the Swedish academicians. "Dr. Narkes," she said shyly, "I want to be a mathematician like you when I grow up." Flenna knelt down to meet the child's eyes. "Remember this," she said gently, "your mind is a gift. Never let anyone convince you otherwise." As she watched, the girl returned to her parents. Flenna thought of her own journey, from a child with an unusual aptitude for numbers to a woman who had changed not just her field, but the very perception of what a mathematician could be. The path had been arduous, filled with obstacles and injustices that had nearly broken her spirit. But standing here now, she understood that every challenge had strengthened her, every setback had prepared her for this moment. Not just to receive accolades, but to open doors for others. The final chapter of Flenna's story wasn't written in awards or accolades, though there were many. It was written in the lives she touched, the minds she nurtured, the barriers she dismantled. 5 years after the trial, the Narkes Institute for Applied Mathematics occupied a modern building on the UCLA campus, its glass walls symbolizing the transparency and inclusivity that were its founding principles. Inside, researchers from diverse backgrounds collaborated on problems ranging from climate modeling to disease prediction to economic forecasting. Flenna moved through the halls with quiet authority, still preferring her notebooks to computers, still working late into the night when a problem captured her imagination. But now she was not alone in her dedication. The Institute had become a beacon for brilliant minds who didn't fit the traditional mold, people who might otherwise have been lost to science. On this particular evening, Flenna was meeting with a group of high school students from East Los Angeles, teenagers with exceptional abilities but limited opportunities, much like herself at their age. As they gathered in the conference room, eyes wide with curiosity and nervous excitement, she recognized the look of hunger, not just for knowledge but for belonging. "Each of you is here because you have something special," she told them. "A way of seeing the world that is uniquely yours. That is your power, not just your intelligence but your perspective." She shared her own story with them, not the sanitized version that had made headlines, but the raw truth of her struggles and doubts. She wanted them to understand that genius wasn't about perfection or certainty, it was about persistence and courage. "The world may not always make space for you," she said, "but never stop making space for yourself." As the students left, buzzing with inspiration and possibilities, Flenna remained in the conference room, looking out at the campus where she had once been cast out as a thief. The journey had come full circle, transforming not just her life but the lives of countless others. She thought of her mother's words, "They can take your possessions, Menina, but never your mind." In the end, it was her mind, her brilliant, unstoppable, extraordinary mind, that had not only saved her but had changed the world. And in that change, she had found her true purpose, not just to discover but to illuminate, not just to succeed but to elevate, not just to survive but to transform. For Flena Narquez, that was the greatest theorem of all. That genius once revealed could never again be caged. Congratulations, type 9 in the comments so that I know you stayed until the end with me. Thank you for watching, and until tomorrow's story on this same channel.